All right, let's jump back in here and let's talk through those 5 elements that we have on the screen: the reporting, investigation, evaluation, action, and documentation pieces that are important in the threat assessment process. First thing we're going to talk about is reporting. Before you report, you have to observe something, and then to observe something, then you must be troubled by that thing. So what is a threat? When we normally think of the word threat, we think of I'm going to kill you threat, that verbal communicated threat. Well, that's a threat, right? So their words can be a threat. How about somebody doing the finger gun thing? That's an action based threat. We could have somebody who's doing a school report, an essay, and they're talking about how that they really idolize the Columbine shooters and think that they engaged in actions that were actually justified. That would be a troubling threat. We could have with even younger kids, and it could be older ones as well, but you may see this more with the younger kids, them drawing very violent imagery out when in their schoolwork. Well, that would be a threat. We could see maybe, and this tends to be more of an older student action, them standing in front of a mirror taking a picture of themselves looking like a gangster and waving around what looks like a handgun or firearm and posting it on social media. And that's a threat too. Right? So it's anything that raises concern in the lives of others that this person may be a danger to themselves or others. Those are things that end up and should be reported. Well, how do you report such things? Well, within the school district world, the most important and effective way of doing it is bringing this issue, this concern, these writings, that picture, to the attention of the building administrator. That is probably the most common way and most effective way and the most expedient way of making a report. We also know that if we think that someone is a danger to themselves or others or being victimized, we have that whole mandated reporter kind of thing too with the child line pieces. So a child line could also result in a threat assessment being done for the student. We also have the ability of safe to say. Now, I've noted before that telling an administrator is normally your best solution. Maybe there's some concerns that you have, and you may need some anonymity in this process and some assurance that there's going to be action and documentation done. So therefore, maybe using the safe to say system is another means of making a report. But that still may not alleviate our needs as a mandated reporter. So we need to keep that in mind as well. So now we have the investigation phase. So the law mandates that all schools have a threat assessment team. It can be at least 3 different ways. You can have a district team, and that's it. Just the district team manages all the threat assessments for any and all buildings within the district. You could have building-based teams. Or I think in most places you're going to have a district-based team and then building-based teams. That's, I think, the most effective model, actually. Either way, this process is led by an administrator. And the whole point of the investigation now is the raw gathering of information. We're trying to gather information, and what's our question again? Is this student on the pathway to violence? Right? And if so, how quickly are they moving down that path or up that path, escalation path? Probably one of the most effective ways of dealing with any kind of threat that comes up, now it also depends on the type of threat, is just going and interviewing the student directly as a first stage. It's the most expedient way, most direct way, and it's been reported that when you were on the playground that you threatened to kill Johnny. Now, normally that's not your first question in the process. We're not going through that. That's a later training, the nuance of that. Normally the questioning is, do you have any idea why I wanted to speak with you today? But Either way, there's an interview of the subject. Now, depending upon what happens with the interview with the subject, then there may be the need to interview witnesses. In different situations and different circumstances, you start with the witnesses first, but that's all. It's getting in the weeds, and I've jumped in the weeds too much. We also have the ability to review the student records. Have we done threat assessments in the past? Are there any risk assessments against this for the student? Have there been any alerts from your system that tracks student activities and what they're writing, right? And or are there safe to says out there and child lines in relation to the student? All of those things are important information gathering chunks. The next stage is the evaluation stage. And when we look at the evaluation stage, what are we trying to determine? Is this a transient threat? And we're going to have two fancy words, and the first one is transient. In other words, it's a heat of the moment kind of event. Think of a road rage event where people may have said things or made gestures of things because they're angry and frustrated as a result of something that has inconvenienced their life, right? But this action, this threat, it lacks actionable intent, to use a more technical definition there. It lacks the ability to enact it. I'm going to blow up the ABC school with a thermonuclear device, right? If you don't have the ability to build the thermonuclear device, you can't actually act upon that threat, right? It's just the question that we drive toward when we're looking to the transient. Is this a simple manifestation of frustration? More fancy words, right? And even having done it, have we ever said or done things in our vehicle that we then immediately go, man, I really feel bad about doing or saying those things? There's normally regret behind it. People who are going to engage in substantive, which is hint, the next thing we're going to talk about, kinds of threat, they're not regretting it because, I'm mad at you and I'm glad that I punched you in the nose, or that I want to engage in this violence because I think violence is a good option. I don't. I'm acting, right? So let's talk about that substantive threat. So it's going to be the opposite of what we just saw, isn't it? It has actionability. I want to do it, and I have the means and opportunity to do it. That's one of the reasons why in the threat assessment process, one of the things that's asked of the student is, do you have access to weapons? Does that mean having access to a hunting rifle mean that someone is going to engage in violence? No. But if they have access to, we'll pick on the hunting rifle, and they've been effectively able to harvest game, and then on top of it, now they have the intent within themselves to come and do something, well, that escalates our concern, doesn't it? They have the means and the desire. Having the means alone is not inherently significant. It's meaningful, but it doesn't mean it's a substantive threat. Let's move on. Let's think about action, not on the behalf of the subject. Let's think about the action of those engaged in the threat assessment process. Whether it is a transient threat or a substantive threat, there should always be some action, some intervention of some type. In the threat assessment questions of the subject, normally there are two questions like this near the end of that interview. It says, how could you have handled this situation better in the future? Well, I should have just walked away from Johnny when he frustrated me because, he called me a name, and that's what I should do better next time, right? And then also the question of, how do I make amends, right? Because we would like for people to get along and not carry grudges, carry grievances into the future, right? So that's an intervention, even from a very simple nature. Now, I'm a Act 44 safety and security coordinator for a school district. Do I care if the student's disciplined? No. It's not my desire to have them disciplined or not have them disciplined. The question is, does discipline affect the means that we're trying to accomplish? Does it reinforce the person that, when you're frustrated, you shouldn't say those things, you shouldn't do those things? If discipline helps accomplish the goal, great. Also, the parents should always be informed, and you should really document the date and time that you communicated that with the parent. Let's talk about that documentation process. It must be documented. You must have documentation there. Now, how you document isn't terribly relevant. Some ways are easier and some are more difficult. Actually, as we move through this training for the administrators, we're going to provide a free tool for you to use. And that's an advertisement for you to continue in this training process and look at the other training videos for those who actually have to engage in the threat assessment process. But so it could be just raw paper, but there are companies that sell programs to help this process, from their perspective, be easier and more effective. Regardless of how we document, we must be professional. Whatever we document should be thorough. If there's a field that says date, time, you put the date and the time. We complete the fields. We also must be completely objective. Joe Friday, right? We don't write from our frustration with this student because it's the 6th time we've had to do a threat assessment for that student. If we get to the 6th one, maybe we weren't terribly effective in the first 5, right? Might need to rethink that. We also need to remember that this is a FERPA document. The parent has a right to see it if they ask for it. So that should always temper what we write and how we do our work. So we've seen that there are 5 chunks to the threat assessment process. There's the reporting, the investigation, the evaluation, the action, and the documentation.